Hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about infiltration and runoff. So, the water table is something we need to talk about first. It is the boundary between groundwater and land. So normally we have land, and then we have once you go deeper into the land or into the crust, you'll find groundwater. Okay, and this is actually the water we get from wells. Okay, wells pull out water from the groundwater, and the boundary between land and groundwater is something we call a water table. Okay. Um, so go ahead and pause this video and try question number 9. What is indicated by the dashed line labeled X? Watershed, A, B, water table, C, impermeable bedrock, or D, impermeable soil. Impermeable means not permeable. Permeable is the same as permeability, meaning the ability of water to flow through soil. So if something is impermeable, it cannot flow through soil. Okay. The correct answer is B, water table. So the water table is a boundary between land and groundwater. Zone of saturation just means this part of the ground is very saturated or filled with water. So number 5 is infiltration. This infiltration is something that's actually part of our water cycle, and this is when water seeps into the ground. Okay, so infiltration is when, say, it's raining, when that water seeps into the ground, inside the earth. We call that infiltration. And finally, runoff is when water, instead of seeping into the ground, it flows across the surface. So, runoff is when water flows across the surface of the land and into nearby bodies of water. It's optional for you to write these definitions down. So, runoff is when water is running off the surface into a nearby body of water, like an ocean. Infiltration is when water, instead of running off the surface, it seeps into the ground. So, go ahead and write these down in your notes if it's not already there. High infiltration and high runoff. Let's talk about these two things and what conditions will cause high infiltration or for water to be able to seep into the ground more, or what conditions will cause high runoff or for water to just flow over the ground instead more. So there are two conditions that we need to look at: vegetation and slope. So to find higher infiltration, we need more vegetation, okay? Why? Vegetation are just plants. If you have more plants, the roots of those plants will pull water into the soil. That will cause high infiltration, okay? And the plants will also prevent water from just running off the surface. This is why plants are really good to have around to prevent flooding. Sorry, this should be number 2, is gentle slope. If my land is not steep like this, and instead it's more flat, gentle slopes means flatter land, then it's going to be harder for my water to just run off, right? The water will need more time to run off, and therefore there it will have a higher chance to go inside the ground instead. Now, what are the conditions we need for higher runoff? We need less vegetation, kind of like this. The less plants you have, the less likely it is for the water to go into the soil, and the more likely it is for the water to just run off and go into a nearby body of water. So, places like cities will have higher runoff because there's not much vegetation there. Next, another thing we want to have high runoff is steep slope, kind of like this. If you have a steep slope that's not flat, then it's much easier for water to just run off instead of going into the ground because the water doesn't have time to go into the ground. It's so steep that the water just flows down because of gravity. So let's write that down in your notes. To have high infiltration, you need more vegetation and a gentle slope. To have high runoff, you need less vegetation and a steep slope. So, in places like cities, we have high runoff because we don't have a lot of vegetation in cities. So, go ahead and pause this video, try question number 10. Which conditions on Earth's surface will allow for the greatest amount of water to seep into the ground? A, gentle slope and permeable. B, gentle slope and impermeable. C, steep slope and permeable. D, steep slope and impermeable. Remember, permeable or permeability is the ability of water to flow through soil. Impermeable is the water being unable to flow through soil? The correct answer is, so remember your notes? The correct answer is A. If we have a gentle slope, then it's harder for water to it is easier for water to seep into the ground. It has more time to seep into the ground. And permeability, or the more permeable the ground is, the more easy it is for water to flow through. Go ahead and pause this video. Try question 11. After a heavy rainstorm, vegetation on a hill slope was completely removed. How will this removal of vegetation affect the relative amounts of infiltration and runoff that occur during the next heavy rainstorm? A. Infiltration and runoff will both be less. B. Infiltration and runoff will both be greater. C. Infiltration will be less and runoff will be greater. Or D. Infiltration will be greater and runoff will be less. The correct answer is C. Infiltration will be less and runoff will be greater. So it's saying that this place has lots of rainstorm, but all the vegetation was removed. We don't have a lot of vegetation. So how will this affect the infiltration and runoff? Well, if we don't have a lot of vegetation, less vegetation means high runoff. And if we don't have a lot of vegetation, we'll have less infiltration, right? If we don't have a lot of vegetation, kind of like in cities, it's going to be harder for water to flow into the ground, infiltration. But it's going to be much easier for water to just flow across the surface for like runoff. So that's why the correct answer is infiltration will be less, runoff will be greater. Go ahead and pause this video. Try question number 12. During a rainstorm, water is flowing down the side of a hill composed of solid bedrock. What will be the effect on the relative amounts of runoff and infiltration when the water reaches an area of unsaturated soil with a gentler slope? A. Runoff will decrease as infiltration decreases. Runoff will decrease as infiltration increases. C. Runoff will increase as infiltration decreases. Or D. Runoff will increase as infiltration increases. The correct answer is B. Runoff will decrease as infiltration increases. Here's why. We have a rainstorm again, and it's flowing down the side of the hill. How will this affect runoff and infiltration? If my water reaches an area of unsaturated soil, saturated just means it's filled with water, so the soil doesn't have much water, and the soil also have a gentler slope. It's not steep. Remember, gentle slope means high infiltration. So gentle slope, high infiltration. If we have high infiltration, we don't have a lot of runoff. So that's why the correct answer is B. Runoff will decrease as infiltration increases. And that's it for this video. Thank you.